Steve, it's an absolute pleasure to be sitting here in London talking to you. Thank you very much for joining the Parent Show team.
It's a pleasure for me too. Thank you for having me on.
And what we're going to do is we're going to frame the conversation into 4 different areas. We want to talk to you about media and culture, family influences, education and career, and obviously we want to talk about your book that we're very, very relieved that you've brought out, of Raising Girls book, because the Raising Boys book was great too. Now, there are so many issues with media and culture. You zoned in on that quicker than most psychologists and kind of parental experts. Why? Why did you do that?
Well, I think it was what we were discovering from talking to mums and dads, that girls are now extraordinarily anxious. There's about 1 in 5 girls in the UK has a psychological disorder of some kind, and even whatever it shows up as, whether it's eating disorders or cutting or binge drinking or just plain being anxious. It nearly always comes down to something to do with appearance, that girls are almost obsessed. In fact, the whole culture's obsessed with appearance. And because girls are at an age, and they're also part of the way of they're wired up as females to be very socially attuned, they can be easily made anxious about things to do with belonging and fitting in and being acceptable and things like that. So a basically good quality of sensitivity is turned into something to beat them over the head with, and so when you look at where that's coming from, that's very obviously the media. We haven't had this phenomenon of 24-hour bombardment with images. When I was a little boy, I get my mum to buy the Weetabix that had a colour picture in the Weetabix, because a colour picture was an exciting thing to have. Now a girl will see thousands of images a day of impossibly attractive women. She knows, I'm going to be a woman, I'm supposed to turn into something like that. My belly isn't the right shape, my nose isn't right, and it creates a overpowering tsunami of messages that you're not good enough. And it's caught us parents on the hop, because this was never the case before. I mean, we've only had mirrors for 500 years, We've only had television for 60 years. We're just getting television figured out still. And suddenly we've got stuff, that they're texting at 1 o'clock in the morning. And so what I wanted to do with the Raising Girls book was to get everybody on the same page. Because if you're wanting your daughter not to have a Facebook account till she's 14, or not to take her smartphone to bed at night time, it's a bit hard to make a stand if no one else is taking the same stand. And so if everyone's thinking about this and reading about it and talking about it, it'll be easier for your average parent to say that, parents sort of, we're on one voice with this. It's just the norm.
Absolutely. And a huge part of what you're saying is self-esteem, isn't it? That's the issue we need to do. We need to engender self-esteem, confidence, independence. How do we do that, Steve?
Yes, well, there are many bridges to self-esteem. The book is structured around the 5 stages of girlhood, and the idea that early self-esteem and self-belief, it just comes simply from being well-loved. That you get a deep cellular sense that I'm in my mother's arms, she's relaxed, I'm relaxed, this is a totally safe place. So your body remembers absolute lovedness. And from 2 to 5, it's much more about doing stuff. And so girls, let's get out there and make a lot of noise. And mums and dads who are enthusiastic about, oh, look, there's some insects, and look at, and you see people on buses, look, there's a tree. And other people are sitting grimly looking out of the window, like wishing their child wasn't there. The parents who've cracked the secret are just co-enthusing with their baby, and co-enthusing sets the seeds of an attitude to life in that girl. 5 to 10 is all about friendship, and self-esteem is really tested in friendship. People won't like you always, and you're having to learn to, well, I did the right thing, and if my friend doesn't like it, well, they're just bad luck, and I'm going to be here, and I'm going to go to my friend's birthday party even though I've had a better offer, and all those things about what friendship really entails. And so by 10, if a girl can say, I'm a good friend to my friends, I'm loyal, and I'm kind and I'm fair-minded, and I won't let people push me around, then that's, again, it's a kind of a self-esteem that's operationalized. It's not, I'm pretty, it's I'm capable in these important domains of life. And so each stage builds the next level. And I think where the reason I wrote the book in this way is I don't think people knew what the goals were. Often it's just like getting through the day, just getting them off to school, making sure they don't get run over by a bus,
Yeah.
Whereas if you have deep down goals, you realise what you're doing is really, really important.
And it's very helpful as parents to have that framework. It's lovely. It's so nice. You can read the book at night and you can say, okay, she's 2. I'm on track.
Yeah.
This sounds right.
These are the things to watch out for.
Yes, well, I'm glad that you see it that way, because that was the intention, was know where you're going. Yeah.
Absolutely, because you can get so caught up in logistics, can't you? So much about daily life is logistics, getting from A to B, and in one piece.
And the day-to-day can look trivial, but the fact that you get up in the middle of the night once more to that sick child and you don't lose your temper with them and you're kind to them, that's going to be part of their body, and part of they will mother their baby with the same kindness that you mothered them. So your kindness will be still going down the centuries with children you'll never see, because you added that quality to what you gave them. So although it seems trivial, it's actually of monumental importance.
You're leaving a psychological legacy in loving your children that way.
That's a very good way to put it. Yes.
And what about in terms of we've mentioned fashion and made relevant, you've made a link there to eating disorders, which have made a sort of a comeback in recent years amongst young women.
Yes.
What can we do? You've meant, as parents collectively, we may read the book, but what can we do? What action could we take against the mass production of very stylish and perhaps over-revealing clothes for young teenagers?
Yes, sure. Well, I was speaking in Bristol just last week, and Juno magazine organised a brilliant event for parents, and I asked the audience, I said, would you put your hand up if you're unhappy with your own body? And it'd be interesting for your listeners to predict what happened, because 95% of that audience put their hands up.
Yeah.
Not happy with my body.
Yeah.
And now there is no way that you can tell a daughter that she's great if you've for the last 5 years been dieting and fretting about fitting into your jeans.
Yeah.
I think this is part of our role in feminism as adults, is to walk away from that whole thing, and from that whole disease. And so we have to make a mental shift. I'm going to like myself. I'm going to be the shape I am. I'm going to wear the kind of clothes I like. And fashion is for silly little girls. It's not for grown women. It's a temporary obsession of a 16-year-old. And anyone who's over 20 who's still worried about fashion needs to get a life. Is that an English expression? Get a life.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
good.
Absolutely.
I suppose it's about role modelling.
That's it.
If mummy's looking in the mirror going, I'm so fat, how can we expect our children to not carry the same message?
Exactly. Because the way that children grow is they take your whole being into themselves. Your body language, your emotional tone, your words, your posture, they model that into their own nervous system. We found the neurons that do that. And so they turn into you, plus any other role models they've been lucky enough to supplement, the gaps. And so be the kind of woman you want your daughter to be. And then she'll still go through these things. She'll still, probably try out bulimia. She'll probably try out, sticking a pin in her arm or something. But she won't stay with that. It'll just be like, oh, that's pretty silly, and she'll move on.
So that resilience is based in the relationship they have with you as the mother.
Yes. It's a transmission from one person to the other. exactly.
We've got some parents' questions, and a lot of them were about esteem and how to kind of nurture it in your daughter particularly. Now, here's one particular question from Naomi. It says, what do you think about the impact of all the toys that are marketed at girls, the focus on appearance, Polly Pocket, Barbie, etc.? So much of it is about clothes, having different outfits, going shopping or to cafes. And the new Lego Friends range that all pinks and purples and involves hairdressers and clothes shops and cafes. Do you think it reinforces the idea that girls should be predominantly concerned about these things and leave fire stations, zoos, space and so on to boys?
That sounds like it's something straight out of the book. We're completely on the same page. Yes, I mean, I think perhaps people ought to boycott some of that stuff, because social media is a wonderful thing. We could have a Lego boycott up by tomorrow if we wanted to. But they do their research. They researched girls. The Lego researchers spent 5 years researching girls. Their primary preoccupation was beauty. And so they built the Lego Girls range around the friends go to the beauty parlour and the hairdresser and the fashion boutique.
So basically they're responding to what girls are interested in.
Yes, but those are damaged girls. They're already damaged, and so that they're pursuing them into a blind alley, really. And so as parents, we've just got to take back the steering wheel and say, what's going to build character in my daughter? And let's use our influence as a person who's close to her with our time and our energy to get her into engineering and Lego trucks and Lego fire engines and science and playing outside with nature. We have to oppose those forces and lead in a better direction, because I think parents have got much more influence than the media, but not if we cop out and disappear. If they're in their bedroom for 4 hours of a night time online, then we don't have much influence then. Mm-hmm. And I think the disease of the UK is the busyness of parents. I call it the land of the long black cloud, because everyone's got the fear of not having enough money and things like that, and everyone gets terribly busy and rushed. I'm really happy to see communities growing up like the Juno magazine community and like your community and what you're doing with your radio station in valuing parenting above the pursuit of money and luxury and consumption, because their interests are polar opposites. A little baby girl doesn't care if she's living in a tin hut or if she's living in a palace. Not even aware of that, but she's acutely aware of her mother's mental state and emotional state. She's acutely aware of whether mum and dad are getting on okay or not. And those are the things that we can do something about. We just got sucked into some wrong priorities, and luckily everyone's waking up to that now.
Steve, is there a sense that we label girls? You know, I've got 3 nieces. I don't have any daughters myself, but the 3 nieces, you know, there's parents often seem to relish that they love pink, that they're girly, and if they're not like that, there might be a sort of a sort of a shock.
Yes.
We seem as a society to sort of enjoy the fact they're dressed up as fairies during the day and walking around the supermarket with their magic wand. Yes, so there's a sort of we sort of facilitate it, don't we, really?
Yes, I mean, some of that's fine, you know. I wouldn't squash fairyhood at all, but be a little bit watchful that there's even a thing where people dress up mother and daughter in the same label and things like that.
Yes.
Really, you know, it's very narcissistic, really, and our children are not there to be little examples of our fashion taste.
And on the subject of the colour pink, let's talk about pink.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? I mean, we've had so many questions from parents about this. Is it really that bad? Should we be stopping our child, or should we just be putting alternatives there? Guide us.
Yes, I don't really know about this. This hasn't come to Australia. I insisted that the colour of the book, the Raising Girls book, was red, that it was blood red.
Yeah.
And because it's a strong colour, and strongly female colour. But the pink movement, I think, is probably just a reaction to the prettification of girls. And particularly matters from 2 to 5, because your clothes will dictate what you can do. For example, if you're wearing a pretty frilly dress, you can't climb a tree.
And you're not encouraged to.
No, you'll spoil your dress. Often very low-income mothers, I think, regain some of their femininity through their daughters, and so the beauty quests that they have in America, they're very much favoured by people on terribly low incomes, terrible self-esteem. The mothers are often very sort of having like a second childhood through their daughter, and I think it's to do with the sadness of sometimes of women's lives, in working women's lives, that their daughter creates a bit of a magic spark. And so it's not a bad impulse, but it goes, perhaps needs to be thought through a little bit more.
And it's not necessarily in the best interest of the child.
Certainly not, no, because those girls look just so uptight.
I think what you've said is really that mum needs to be confident in who she is in every regard. And then, role modelling everything, the way she is, the things she believes in, who her role models are, and not just going along with the easy route, which is to just be dictated, her image and self-image being dictated by popular culture.
Yes. And confidence is an interesting thing, because it's not just a bootstrap exercise. We gain confidence through community with other people. And so when I do my talks, the room starts to get more and more revved with this anger at what's happened to our girls. They're being trashed, having unhappy sex at 14 because that's what they think they're supposed to do. And so I think that when mothers get together, they discover confidence through something, and people have often said this with my books, I've voiced something which their deep inner misgivings had been whispering to them. And we don't often listen to our own misgivings, but there's a quiet voice in there that knows exactly what's what. And if someone on the outside, I'm not an expert, I don't generally prescribe things. I just tell stories and throw some ideas around. And people come up and say, you said what I'd always thought. I'd always thought that, but no one else had said that before. Thank you for saying what I always thought. And that's the greatest success to me, is I've confirmed someone's heart.
Given them the strength to take collective action, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Can I talk to you, Steve, about you mentioned it there briefly, just before we move off media and culture, about the premature sexualization. I mean, there's certainly some things that we can do as parents. We can kind of negate the influence of media, we can and diminish it, but there's time when they're outside your control. And what can you do to combat that? I mean, from peer pressure to outside influences at school, how can you redress that, the kind of influence that they have?
Yes. Well, it's like... We'll pause while I think to give a good answer. Can you ask me again?
Sure,
not sure quite
about the over-sexualization of girls and...
Okay, I've got it.
Yeah.
Basically, the way we can understand girlhood right now is that we've lost 4 years of childhood. That our 18, what you and I were dealing with at 18, they're dealing with at 14. What we dealt with at 14, they're dealing with at 10. So childhood has been concertina back. Now, sexualization, what it does is it wipes out the 10 to 14 very special age group. In 10 to 14 in girls is the soul time, when a girl finds her soul, what she deeply believes and wants and stands for. And that's a 4-year kind of inner journey that she's making. If you take that away, she collides with sexual pressure from boys, from a world that devalues her and sees her just like a toy to be played with. And she doesn't have the resources on the inside yet to fight back. And so what all the old cultures did was they were very, very protective around the girls of that age. They taught them a lot and talked about deep down things about woman's strength, woman's value. They hung around a lot with older women, grandmothers and aunties, eccentric women who didn't fit the mold. So that girl could say, well, I'm a loud, animals outdoor kind of girl, or I'm a poetic, quiet girl. I want to always have the company of friends. So I'm not even the marrying kind, or I'm not even the pairing kind. I'm this kind of girl. And that's what you're looking for in your daughters from 10 to 14. In the book we call it Spark, which is a focus in the material world, like a musical instrument or a hobby or a creative craft or a sport that grounds her in the real world, but links to her heart on the inside. And so she wakes up in the morning, can't wait to get back on the harp playing, or can't wait to find out how her animals are going in the morning. There'll be a hobby or an activity that's her reason for being alive. And that's your job as a parent, is to find out what a spark is.
Brilliant. That's great advice, and it's great to know to zone in on that 10 to 14. It's brilliant. It's just invaluable help. Now we'll move away from media and culture, and let's move on to family influences. You mentioned a lot about being an active father. So are you a good father if you're an active father? Can you tell us what that's about?
Well, the word I'd use is involved father.
Right.
And because fathering turns out to be very distinctive from mothering. It's not just a dad. When I was young, we thought a dad was like a apprentice mum or assistant mum. And certainly you both do a lot of things in common, but you change nappies and you bath babies and you do those things. But the dad role, when it's been studied, for instance, mothers naturally soothe children. Almost automatically you go to soothe them. Dads stir them up. And they throw babies in the air and they wrestle with toddlers. And we thought that was just dads being bad, but in fact, children whose dads wrestle with them and rumble around with them are more stress resistant, because he's creating excitement, but in a safe context.
In a contained environment.
Yes. And he's a bit more noisy, and he'll take them places you wouldn't take them, and they'll fall in the pond and he'll fish them out, and you would have never let them fall in the pond, but they've discovered that's not the end of the world. And so by the time a girl's in her school age, if her dad talks to her, walks the dog, a bit older, goes for a hot chocolate with her on a Saturday morning, if they go to get something from the hardware shop, they stop on the way home and have a chocolate or an ice cream. What that girl notices, and it's almost out of awareness, she notices, he likes my company. I'm not something he's got to tick off and get over with. I'm interesting to my dad. And when it comes to dealing with boys, she makes this comparison, this boy is not very respectful. He looks away when I'm talking, and he yawns, and he puts me down sometimes, probably because he's wanting to get me to have sex, and he's just trying to make me feel like a bit more desperate. The girls whose dads treat them with respect, they're not going to put up with that. But a girl who's not sure of herself, not sure of her worth, will take more rubbish from boys. And so dads have create a sort of immunity in their girls as a practice male. Girls will marry someone fairly similar to their dad, and if the dad is hurried and dismissive of her, despite what her better brain will tell her, to find a kind, thoughtful man, her heart will go ping, around someone who's...
That's familiar. Familiarity.
We can all recognise these things.
What about children who are, as we know in Hertfordshire, many children are raised by grandparents during the day or looked after during the day? What can grandpa add that grandma may not?
Yes, again, same thing. He's a kind old man and interesting and has different sorts of stories. Grandparents are great for kids. You're lucky if you get that.
And a little girl was a specific parent's question, wasn't it? A little girl being raised by a grandparent during the day. She was wondering what would she learn perhaps from him as opposed to the grandmother about if she falls and cuts her knee. Those kind of, she's interested in those small reactions. And
well, it's very hard to generalise, because we might be more solicitous and worried depending on the man. But knowing guys who probably say, get up, there's nothing,
Get on with it.
Yes, which isn't a bad message.
No,
absolutely. And we have another parent question. It says, can you give us any advice for post-bullied girls? How do you make them stronger without actually turning them into bullies or victims?
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
In the Raising Girls book, there's a chapter on bullying, and there's a chapter on the skills of friendship to itself. It includes that a fair bit. And basically, we all are capable of bullying and do that sometimes because we just want to get our own way. But growing a backbone and learning to hold the middle road. Now, many schools now are introducing a program. There's a program that started in Holland called Rock and Water. It was begun after some bullies killed a schoolboy on a train station and bashed him to death. And Holland's a very safe country, and there was a national shock at that. And a friend of mine who's Dutch devised a program called Rock and Water. And you train in your school, but what it is that sometimes you need to be like water and you need to just melt away. Sometimes you need to be like a rock and stand strong. And they teach you how to know the difference. And it's a good metaphor for kids. When people are wanting you to do stuff you don't want to do and saying things you don't want to hear, is it a time to just say, no, I'm out of here, I'm not going to put up with this. Sometimes it's better to do that. Sometimes I am not going to take this from you, and I'm going to go and I'm going to tell people what you're doing, so stop bullying me right this second. And you practice it with your daughter. You practice
giving her the language.
Yes, the language.
Nice and simple.
The skills. Let's look at some scenarios. What might you say if someone says that to you?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
And I know in Hertfordshire schools we also have resilience programs. So if anyone's listening you can always approach the school and say, have we got any resilience programs like that? Like Rock and Water in our schools, because I know they do exist.
Great.
And are very useful for children.
Another common theme that we've heard in a lot of the questions that we've been asked is about independence. And here's one particular one from Catherine that I wanted to ask you. She's in St. Albans. In a mixed sex household, I feel the girl sometimes gets a bit ignored as she's cooperative and much more self-sufficient than the boy despite being younger. Is it good to allow this independence, or is it starving her of affection?
Okay. Independence maybe isn't the right word for that, but I know what you mean. It's that she's not very demanding.
Self-sufficient.
Yeah, and on the whole, I would be doing some checking out from week to week, whether she's actually going fine or she just has learned to take a back seat. And I think that's really your question is concern is she missing out?
Yeah.
And I think mothers and daughters should have, in fact everybody should have one-to-one time. A family is a good fun and it's a good buzz to be together as a family, but you can't be close to everyone at the same time. And so getting with each child, just you and just them, and in fact this is something from the Raising Boys book that many people have done now. Thousands of people do this now. Go away on a trip with one child, sleep for 2 nights, so that there's time for cooking and sleeping and preparing food, talking, and it's just the two of you, so that things that they've stored up which they haven't felt able to tell you, or things between you that have somehow gone astray, they always come to the surface when you do that. And you can get a clean slate again with them, find out where they're really at. And also, when you're back in the daily melee of life, they can draw on that memory that Mum and I are really close when we get the chance, and we have a special thing between us, and they know if they need to, they can call on that again. And so you don't have to be always, like that, but if they've got it in their memory banks, then once, even if it's only a couple of times a year, it seems to make a huge difference.
Some special experience.
Dig it out when they need it, when they need that kind of reinforcement. That makes a lot of sense. Now let's move on to education.
Well, it's a big topic, Steve. We've got lots of questions.
We know it's one of your favourites.
We're going to get started on the big questions. if you're raising a girl, what are the main lessons that you think parents need to know about what education system might suit them in particular, from nursery onwards? What is it about their particular development that we should be aware of?
Okay. I think that generally you should be very, very happy that in the UK you have a lively and vibrant education system with lots of options and teachers who are dedicated and balancing that is a dreadful thing from government about evaluation and testing and things like that. And so teachers are under stress to achieve, and that's transmitted to kids, and from a very young age. And there's a whole movement called the Save Childhood movement, and you might know those
We've had
people.
them on the show.
Yes.
Yeah, they're great.
And so because the pressure is so strong from school, it's not a bad thing for the message at home to be say, well, just do what you can. And in primary school, we're not too worried about that stuff, because it actually turns kids off learning. They learn less, and they learn it less deeply when it's done to pass a test. So I'd be if I've got a daughter who's anxious about school, I'd be putting in a don't worry message about it. If she's too slack, you might be wanting to put in a, do your homework. But we're always balancing as parents, and at the moment the balance is like, it's not that important, And another thing about schooling is that girls and boys are very out of step educationally. Girls are far more sensible and they're more able. And so I'm a believer, and in fact I'm one of the voices that brought about this idea of sometimes called diamond education. Have you heard of that? Where
No.
it's to do with kids being in co-education together in the classroom when they're young, but in the early puberty years, around 10 or 11, having separate classes for boys and girls, staying separate through the early teens, and then coming back together again in around 16 or 17. It's called diamond education because of that way that they separate, then they come back in like a diamond diagram. And because we found that in the classroom, and it's all written about in the Raising Boys book, interestingly, was some studies where the girls did so much better if there were no boys in the classroom. The reasons for that were that the teacher could concentrate more because he wasn't doing that crowd control all the time. The girls took more risks because the boys weren't checking them out all the time. And the boys did better because they weren't showing off in front of the girls. And because girls are often quite mature at 12 physically, they're really maturing, and the boys are still sort of dorky little goofy characters, and the boys are often stupid towards the girls, and they make fun of them, and the girls get embarrassed, and there's a sort of it's not a very safe emotional environment.
And it sounds like it brings out the worst in both gender. Really.
I kind of was always under the impression that girls suffered more, but it really seems like it doesn't benefit either in that period.
Yes, that's right. And so it depends on. I wouldn't force this onto a school if they didn't want to do it. I think it works best where the school themselves say, and I've worked with hundreds of schools where the staff have said, we want to do something better for boys' education, and I've recommended this, and they've done it. And the girls have benefited more than the boys, and because they're out of each other's hair. And the teachers have a very different style with girls, and they're much more collaborative and interactive. Boys just like to be herded along. And what are the goals? Right, go for the goals. And whereas girls can go deeper and be more expressive, better at teamwork, things like that. Now, because we actually want to be in a co-ed world, boys need the benefit of what girls bring, and vice versa. Coming back together about 16 is a great thing, because then it's a lot of excitement of being with the opposite sex, and the boys have matured enough now to appreciate that.
And a lot of single-sex schools in England do that. They all do their A-levels together, even if they're separate.
Yes.
So you're saying this is an option for a co-ed school, even though you're co-ed, why not set them apart?
Yes.
It seems very sensible.
Yes.
Yeah. we know that there's lots of mums and dads listening tonight, especially mums who have had perhaps a career and left London to move to Hertfordshire for their families, and many of them have had very, very high-flying careers and are very well qualified in their role, and they felt they're doing the best for their children in terms of staying at home.
Yes.
And I think it would be, we've got lots of parent questions on this, but how do we as women, if we live with the daily conflict of trying to be the best mum we can, but also a fulfilled person.
Yes.
How do we tell our children, our daughters, that it's great to have a career and be educated, but at the end of the day, you may be at home folding socks at lunchtime. We live with that conflict, and it's not an easy thing to live with. If we work full time, every day, we feel like our children might lose out, be damaged, whatever. If we do the opposite, it might cost us money to work, to have a job.
Yes.
And it's very confusing in terms of what you pass on to your daughter when we haven't worked it out ourselves.
Of course. And I think, first of all, get hold of a book I wrote called Raising Babies, which was a book that was that summed up the worldwide research story around nursery versus stay-at-home mothering or fathering. And because the science in terms of the benefits and the huge gains that are made by being with somebody who loves you when you're little in your first 2 years is outstanding. The other thing is to not be sexist about this. Maybe it's the dad who ought to be folding the socks, and so that's shared out and worked out between, because sometimes the mother is the one who has an exciting job and he's not actually wrapped in his job, and he'd love that. So really be flexible through the growing up years about who does that. The third one is that we don't live the right way in our lonely little houses, and in proper community, you're not alone by yourself with a kiddie all day. We need more places to go and people to go with, so that we're not lonely. And a lot of the best social movements in the British Isles are being started by so-called stay-at-home mums, fighting for breastfeeding rights, fighting for changing the media and things, and they're doing that with babies on their lap. And so getting together, building community, means that your adult brain is being stimulated and used every day while you are still mothering, and sometimes minding each other's kids, so we can do that. It's hard because the culture, that's not what it wants. I wrote Raising Babies because the Blair government at the time wanted everybody in the workforce, every child in a nursery from the time they were 6 weeks old. It was turning into communist Russia here. And we knew that there was a possibility we could get parental leave legislation. People were looking for that. So I wrote that book with a 12-month lead time, that there would be some ammunition for people to argue for parental leave.
Wonderful.
You've got pretty good parental leave in this country, and so. But you will always have to fight governments. You'll always have to fight the corporate economy, who just wants cogs to work for them. They want slaves, and don't be a slave.
And you must be so proud of what you achieved in terms of parental leave. What's the next ambition? What's the next step in terms of getting the system to work for us, I suppose?
Oh yeah, I mean there was a huge movement of child development people who were doing that, and I was just the one who wrote the book. And Raising Girls every movement needs a book, and it's you can save 10 years by writing the right book. And Germaine Greer wrote the right book, and Silent Spring, Rachel Carson started the environment movement. That was the right book. And the Raising Girls book is you can read Raising Girls if you had trouble doing your O-levels. You can read Raising Girls. It's stories, and it's plain language, and it's funny. If your husband drives a truck, he'd still enjoy reading that book. It's a gripping story to read. And so I think getting all parents having one voice, and so there's nobody left behind with this, that's my goal. Yeah.
Steve, in raising boys, as I do, I've got 2 boys, and to be good boyfriends and husbands and fathers, I think it's important as well not to forget that they have to have a role if you're raising sons, and how our daughters are treated, isn't it? You know, and what best advice would you give to people raising sons in terms of how they value women?
Yes, definitely. Don't tolerate anything in terms of rudeness or dismissiveness with sons. And in a way, it's a lot to do with the relationship with your husband as well. And so talk about it together, privately. That he looks to us for how to be around women.
And it's always wonderful, isn't it, when a father steps in and says, your mother has asked you to do something, you need to do it. And then you know he's going to learn from that mummy's opinion matters.
That's right. For sure. And I think now with the whole business with pornography and very, psychiatric units in England are treating 11, 12-year-old boys for pornography addiction because they've molested their sister or something because for 2 years they've been watching online porn and they just think that's what you do. And so men have got to come out and say, it's not manly to be looking at hours of porn on the computer. That's a creepy thing to do. Real men don't do that. And that hasn't been the message up to date. There was a man who was the editor of Ralph magazine or Loaded magazine, one of those lads magazines. He edited that for 4 years. Then he got married and they had a little baby daughter. And he came out in the British press and he said he was deeply remorseful. He said, in my editing that magazine, putting those girly pictures on the cover, I probably walked thousands and thousands of boys into the world of hard porn. I was the gateway to that. And he said, and now I've got a little daughter and I think about how she's going to be treated when she grows up. And he was really, really racked with guilt over that because his heart had been opened by having a daughter. It's a hard-heartedness that comes through that whole world. There's a chapter in Raising Girls that was written by a woman friend of mine who's a campaigner on pornography in the media, and it makes your hair stand on end to read that chapter. It's the sort of things that kids will come across online. They're not just disrespectful of women, they're horrendously mistreating of women, and women that are injured and killed in the making of those films, which are 2 clicks away from your 10-year-old son if he's online unsupervised.
And I suppose this brings us back to technology at home, how vital it is to have the conversation about how the family manages the technology that they have.
That's right. And to be calm and good-hearted about it and to say, look, there'll be boys at school who'll show you stuff on their mobile phone and things that it's pretty gross but you'll be curious about it because we're all, boys and girls were interested in each other's bodies and attracted to things and that it's fine to be curious and fine to be attracted to lovely bodies, but looking at that stuff all the time it's not as good as getting to know real girls in the real world, and real girls are so much more interesting and more satisfying, even though a bit scary. Get a real girl. Don't just look at pictures when you're growing up.
So there's work to be done by mums and dads raising girls and boys, really.
Yeah, it's always.
If everybody was doing their job.
Yes, throughout history, it's been the main concern of the human race is to equip the next generation. That's what we do best. Is we create smart, loving kids, and it goes down through the ages. That's what people do. That's what human beings do. Yeah.
Right, Steve, thanks so much. And of course, your Raising Girls has been published by HarperCollins and it's available everywhere, really, isn't it? Online, Amazon.
Yes, or you can borrow one from the library. Don't worry.
I like it. Fantastic. Steve, thanks so much
for
giving us your time today.
It's been a joy to talk to you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.